Sea stars are important predators in rocky intertidal ecosystems. They move along the rocks, eating anything unlucky enough to be in their path, and that includes things like these mussels and these snails that you see here. But in 2015, there was an outbreak of sea star wasting disease all along the west coast of the United States, and this devastated populations of sea stars. And this didn't just affect sea stars, it cascaded through the whole ecosystem. And we started with ecosystems that looked like this, healthy and thriving. And now we have ecosystems that look like this. Now, in the absence of sea stars, we think that crabs are likely to step into the role of top predator in this ecosystem. But we don't know what effect the crabs will have on the other organisms in this ecosystem or its recovery. And so we really need to understand all of the organisms in the ecosystem and the complex network of interactions that are between them. Now, most of what we know about complex networks comes from creating random models and then simulating ways to make them collapse. But we find that these random models often don't predict ecosystem response and the response in other types of networks. And that's because ecosystems and other networks in real life aren't assembled randomly. Now, a network is just a series of points that are connected. They could be people connected to each other on social media, or they can be organisms connected to each other by who eats whom, right? Predator-prey interactions. Now, these networks, food webs and social media networks, these are something called small world networks. And what that means is that the average distance between any 2 points in this network is surprisingly short. Everything's really close to each other. Now, if you're a Gen Xer like me, you're probably already familiar with this phenomenon. It is known also as 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. For the millennials in the room, this is a game that us older folks played in the 90s, and it was discovered that everyone in Hollywood is connected to Kevin Bacon through only 6 people. So the rest of us interpreted that as, I'm only 6 introductions away from meeting heartthrob Kevin Bacon. Right. Now, food webs are the same. It doesn't take very long to get from point A to point B in the food web. Of course, the snails don't want to meet Kevin Bacon, but it's the same idea. Everything is closely connected. Now, if that's true, then what does that mean when we lose something like the sea stars? What's going to happen to this network? The effects are going to cascade through the ecosystem, and they're going to affect the sea stars' predators and prey, and their predators and prey, and so on. Until eventually, if we remove enough species, or we change the structure of this ecosystem enough, the network will collapse. So how do we prevent that from happening? Well, imagine that someone shares a fake news story on social media. And their friends share it, and their friends' friends share it, and everyone shares it till it gets to Kevin. Kevin doesn't check his sources. Kevin shares it with all his friends, until eventually the story cascades through our network. But does this happen? Does my news feed look the same as your news feed on social media? They're different, right? This isn't how it works. The reason this doesn't happen is because we actually form cliques. We form friend groups with dense clusters of interactions. Our friends are also friends with each other, and so on. And so we end up with these different cliques where someone in your group shares a fake news story, and it reverberates through this so-called echo chamber. It's the same idea. And it doesn't spread into this other clique or compartment in this social media network. Food webs also have cliques, where the organisms form these dense clusters of interactions. And so, if that's the case, can we use this property of cliques to prevent extinctions from cascading through the network the same way that they prevent fake news from spreading across social media. Now, we don't want to watch ecosystems collapsing around us. We don't want to wait for that to happen to discover how to save them. But what we can do is look for examples from the past where cliques may have stabilized ecosystems and prevented entire ecosystems from collapsing. If we travel back in time, right here in the Cincinnati area, 440 million years ago, we would find ourselves in a shallow marine ocean. Now, it would be a different ecosystem filled with really strange creatures, things like trilobites and brachiopods, some of those hard to pronounce words. But we can reconstruct that food web and analyze it, and we find the same compartments, the cliques. And there are 4 of them in this ancient ecosystem. Now, there was a disturbance in this ecosystem. The world's glaciers melted and sea level rose, and it connected this ocean basin to 2 nearby ocean basins. And that led to a flood of invasive species. And that caused 300 native species in this ecosystem to go extinct. That's a massive disturbance. But that ecosystem did not collapse. And we think that those cliques helped promote stability and stopped the extinctions from cascading through the entire network. And we see this over and over again in Earth's history, where we find these cliques in ecosystems from the ancient past, and that we think they promote stability and prevent extinction. And so, if we want to save ecosystems today, or prevent the spread of fake news on social media, we need to think about these properties of connectedness and how things like cliques can promote stability and affect network dynamics. What will happen when the sea stars disappear? Thank you.